Good morning, grasshoppers. Monday morning here. It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood, and we're going to be looking at one of the more difficult chapters, 9 and 10, on taking a human life and allowing someone to die. I mean, what can you say? The information here in these two chapters is one that is going to confront all of us at some time. And it seems to me that it's more reasonable to be prepared for this eventuality than to sort of, ignore it. And then when it confronts you, you're sort of perplexed in terms of what to do. So the the notion of these two chapters, I think, in particular, I think your author does a very good job of covering these issues. And there are just a couple of things that I want to chat with you about. And on page 106 and 107, he gives a description or a discussion of suicide. And one of the things that is not mentioned, and I just want to bring it to your attention, is we look at suicide. In fact, suicide is a crime, by the way. Um, if you're successful, it's sort of a moot point. But at the end of the day, there's a very serious philosophical question that's been raised by certain philosophers that when we're looking at the notion of our own life, taking our own life, is it ours to have control over? And I think that that is an important question, but I think it's an adjunct to a more important question that can you conceive of a situation where non existence becomes a viable option? And I think as we weigh into that question, it seems very clear to me that if you're 17 years old and your boyfriend or girlfriend throws you under the bus and you're bummed out about that, that's not grounds to terminate your existence. Certainly, it's grounds to feel bad, but it's also grounds to go, well, they didn't want to be with me, so next, I mean, let's move on, blah, blah, blah. That is, when you look at a little older folks who maybe have lost their job, lost their family, lost a child, for example, the depression can be very real for those folks. And yet, is that grounds to terminate your existence? In the minds of most thinkers, it is not. And it reflects a gross misunderstanding of what life is about and the value of existence, things of that nature. And your author touches a little bit on that. But I would ask you to raise a question for yourself. Is there a situation where you can conceive as non existence as a viable option? Let me see if I can help you out a little bit. If you're in a situation where you have a debilitating disease that's terminal, once you contract this disease, there's no coming back from that. The bus is left and you're terminal. And you are in a situation where you have lost the vast majority of your bodily functions and things of that nature. Is that a situation that warrants saying, I've had enough? I don't want to do this. This is not the nature of quality of life that I want. Um, and does that make a difference if you're whatever age you are? So that's one, just a variable in the equation that we're going to be examining. The other notion is, what if you're elderly? And so I look at people who are elderly as in their 80s or 90s, and I just want you to sort of sort of think about this situation. Um, you're lonely, you're old, you're alone. There's not much going on. You've seen every version of The Price is Right that's ever been done. And you're looking at your life and you're saying to yourself, I've just had enough. I just don't want to do this anymore. Um, it's just repetitive and weary, and I'm old and I'm cranky, and my bones hurt, and blah blah blah. You fill in the blanks. I mean, you can delineate the affirmative notions however you wish, but I want you to try to see that as a situation where someone would say, I just don't want to do this anymore. And there's a mechanism. I go to my doctor, and he affords me the particular prescription that I would need to take to terminate my life and things of that nature. Now, whether that's legal or not, that's not the question right now. The question that we're asking is, from an ethical perspective, is that something that would make sense? Is that something that could be perceived as rational? Now, for myself, I look at that and say, if I'm 90 and I still have my mental functions, and the bodily issues are not that deleterious for me, I can still read, I can still listen to books, I can still, d- watch television, or, things that I can visit with my children, if, blah, blah, blah. So that is a grounds as a counter position to that notion. Well, I'm just tired, I don't want to do it, and blah blah blah. But are there those people that are seriously in that situation where the notion of non-existence becomes a viable option? Is certainly a very serious argument, that we need to consider. Your author goes into the notion of war, and I will share with you that I've been to war. I was in Vietnam, and trust me, war is no fun. The uh, there are very real serious questions that come up if you're participating in a war effort. The notion of violating the commandments of do not kill. If you seriously subscribe to that commandment, then you are now confronted with a serious paradox. And the the notion is that even if you're not directly pulling the trigger, you may be in a support situation that is facilitating that. And again, you can look at the extensions of the problem there. Um, and so I will share with you, there are whole classes you can take in philosophy of war, participation, and the morality of it, and things of that nature. Um, I just want you to be aware that it's a very serious question. And we seem to be living in a world where folks find it convenient to go to war, and the multifaceted deaths that go on. There are those of us who are critical thinkers who look at that, what a waste. Now, in the event of a situation, let us look at Europe from 1933 to 1945. And are there times when a nation, to genuinely defend itself, needs to go to war? And that clearly is the case. So, here again, when you look at the topic of war in and of itself, you open up Pandora's box. and just a multitude of things come out that have to be addressed. Um, Terrorism, capital punishment. Capital punishment is a big issue. It's come back on the scene numerous times. Even in Michigan, they wanted to have a legislative bill to reinstitute capital punishment. Capital punishment was, I think, absolved in this state way back in the 19th century. And I think the punishment in Michigan was hanging. The But ought there to be capital punishment? Once again, a very, very serious debate. It seems to me that if you are looking at a social justice phenomenon, you exist in society with particular rights and prerogatives and responsibilities. And if you commit a heinous crime violating those fundamental principles, especially if you are looking at heinous crimes as murder, unnecessary killing, rape, pillage, things of that nature, um, do you, by your own behavior, abdicate your prerogative or privilege to exist in that society? And conversely, or consequently, does the state have the obligation to support you in a prison type situation? Um, there are very serious debates on both sides of those questions. The Just so that you're aware that this is not just a simple knee jerk reaction to this notion. If I heard the news correctly, one of the states, I think down south, they just executed another prisoner, and so it's still going on in your worldview today. Um, the Get the page turned here. Um, the Okay, so that finishes up our capital punishment, and we turn to chapter 10, allowing someone to die, mercy, death, and mercy killing. Once again, um, there isn't much that I'm going to really be able to uh, add here. I mentioned the notion of euthanasia, which is uh, the terminating someone's life. And historically, euthanasia is is done for merciful reasons. The uh, the variables that go on this here is allowing someone to die, a mercy death, and mercy killing. And as I shared with you, try to wrap your head around the question from, is there a situation? I happen to be a motorcyclist, for example, and I've been, riding motorcycles since I was a kid, but I'm in, hypothetically, you're in a tragic motorcycle accident and you're going to spend the rest of your existence staring at the ceiling. Is that something that is warranting a termination, euthanasia, or mercy killing? Those two examples. So, when you're young, it's incredibly difficult to really get your head wrapped around some of these circumstances. But it's important that you do, because you never know when a situation is going to arise when you're going to need to seriously confront that. Um, so then they go into the legality of it and allowing someone to die, especially if you're in a situation in the hospital, you have a relative, a family member who is in a terminal situation. And and you're the one that's has to be in charge of pulling the plug. We use that as a metaphor, you know, and very serious decision if you're not thinking about that. So, all of these ancillary questions: what's the meaning of life? What are we doing here? What's the value of life? What is Socrates argues a life unexamined is not worth living. And so, what does it mean to live your life? Um, we position a gentleman like Stephen Hawking, who at a very young age, in his early 20s, contracted the muscular dystrophic disease that he had, and for the rest of his life in a wheelchair. Um, was incredibly productive under incredible handicaps. So sometimes we need to have that paradigm set in front of us so we can see what can be done if we want to work through the particular challenges. But those questions, I think, are important, that when we look at our existence, we look at our life, and we ask the question, what's it all about, Alfie? What am I doing here? What am I supposed to be doing here? And so there are some relatively simple questions that you can ask, and I do this historically with my classes, is that every day of your life, ask yourself, what am I doing today that makes my life worth living? And as an ancillary question, what am I doing with my minutes? Because your minutes may be all you have. So I use that as a profound impact notion of start thinking in terms of your life, in terms of minutes. What am I doing with my minutes? I just received an email from a cousin of mine who was babbling on about some stuff, and the thought that came to my mind was, "This is wasting my minutes." And here again, it seems like a very simple, juvenile kind of, reaction to it. But who are your minutes important to? I have a suspicion that other folks don't mind wasting your minutes. So that's where you existentially get into the notion of being responsible for your own life and your own happiness and your own minutes. They're your minutes. How do you want to spend them? It's your life. How do you want to spend that? Um, the the chapter continues on with some of the things that we've chatted about on page 133, changes in attitudes towards mercy death. That is very critical, the changes in attitudes. And I am here to tell you in no uncertain terms that the attitudinal changes concerning euthanasia and mercy death and allowing someone to die are radically changing. The Ostensibly the horror of pulling the plug or allowing someone to die or even choosing to terminate your own existence um, is diminishing. And I think probably for good reason. Medical technology today is so infinitely sophisticated. And the mechanisms that we have for, genuinely allowing someone to have a responsible death and allowing them to initiate the choices over our own existence are there. Uh, One of the things that always comes to mind is that if you talk with most rational adult people, they'll say, it's not that I'm afraid of death. I just don't want it to hurt. And nobody wants to go in a fiery crash, or drowning is certainly no fun. um, Here in Grand Rapids, they just had a 14-year-old young person that drowned out in Lake Michigan yesterday. We saw on the news that famous actress that drowned in and so we have those examples, and we're going, yuck. Yuck. We don't like that. Fiery crashes, drowning, um, the disease that eats your skin away. Yuck. We don't like that. But are there genuine mechanisms for terminating your existence that are not at all yucky? You take this pill or whatever, and you just go to sleep, and that's the end of the show. Um, an insulin overdose will do that to you. Uh, yeah, if your doctor gives you a prescription for sleeping pills and says, by the way, Martha, don't take the whole bottle at one time. That's what they mean. Because what happens is that the sleeping pills arrest your system. They slow it down so much that your heart simply can't deal with it, and your heart stops because it's in a position of just ultra super relaxation, and it just stops. Um, I'm just giving you um, notions that they're already there. I mean, it's not like I'm making any of this up, but I think that we need to think about that, and we need to think about that from a responsible position. Um, it goes into the realm of the critical thinking, the whole critical thinking phenomena. Are you going to be a critical thinker, or are you just going to react to the environment? So, we come out of this chapter, these two chapters, with a hopefully a little more enlightened perspective on the notion of death. So, if I may, let me finish up here with I think what is a very critical notion. Recently, we have heard discussions about people claiming, well, you know, I came back from death. Um, and there are movies that are being made, and all kinds of things about people that have died and seen the light, and whatever. Um, by definition, that's a fiction. You can have a near death experience, but once you're dead, and you don't come back. It's the definitive notion of being dead. I want you to be very clear about that in your mind, that you don't die and then sort of miraculously come back to life. It doesn't work that way. Medically, it doesn't work that way. So when we hear stories about people that are in a hospital, and sometimes they're even claimed to be, flatlined and things of that nature, and then wham, all of a sudden, they come back. That is a medical anomaly that somebody misdiagnosed what was going on. But at the end of the day, if they pump the formaldehyde through your system, you're toast, and that's just the way that is, and you don't come back. So here again, I am a very stick in the mud about definitions, and so that definition is very important to me, in the sense of having folks understand that you can have a near-death experience, but when you're dead, you don't come back. That's just the way it is. I've looked at your work, and quite frankly, I'm very tickled. I'm very impressed with your work. You're doing a good job, and good for us. I know I received a couple of emails this morning from students. I think that Blackboard and maybe IT are going through some upgrades and some changes. And I think some emails are getting interrupted and things of that nature. Don't jump out the window. Just drop me an email. Let me know what's going on, and I am more than glad to fix that. I am not Vlad the Impaler on things of that nature. So, once again, I hope you have a great week. The other notion that I just wanted to finish with is here in Michigan, we are doing our best. This governor is doing her best to try to curtail the increase in corona infections and corona deaths. So do yourself a favor and pay attention to the protective measures that you can engage to both protect yourself and to protect other people. The whole issue that's going on right now about not wearing a mask, and I have a constitutional right and all of that sort of thing, um, really falls in the face of the idea that do you have an obligation to possibly protect other people? And um, and so, for example, you may have the virus and be asymptomatic and not know it. So if you're out in public, you're, you're Godzilla on steroids, if you will. And if you wear a mask, you're doing something to help prevent the spread of that infection. Here again, we look at our contemporary issues in terms of the two chapters, 9 and 10. And Corona is nothing to fool around with. And people are dying. Just on the news this morning, an infant passed away because of corona. So children are contracting this virus, and now they're even going down into babies getting it. And I'm not, hyperbolizing the news or sensationalizing it as much as I'm trying to pay attention to it to see what's going on and saying, be careful out there. Use your head. Be intelligent young people. Act like it. Okay. Um, I hope you have a great week. It's supposed to be hot. Oh my God! The temperature is going to go right through the furnace ceiling on this week. But so be careful. If you have a pool, get in it. If you have a lake, get in it. And if you live, if if you have fans, you use all that kind of stuff. So you take care. If you have any questions, drop me an email, and I'll talk to you soon.